Halo is a franchise synonymous with the FPS genre. When most people think of Halo, they think of stepping directly into the boots of the Master Chief, the Arbiter, or maybe even one of the ODSTs. But it wasn't always meant to be this way. When Halo 1 was being developed in the late 1990s, it was originally meant to follow a completely different path. Before Halo was even called Halo, it went through a variety of internal name changes ranging from Armor to Monkey Nuts to the Santa Machine, among others. But it wasn't just the name that would change. Before Halo turned into the FPS that dominated the 2000s, it started off instead as an RTS. RTS, short for real-time strategy, was a genre of games that saw its peak in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. Things like Westwood's Dune or Command & Conquer clashed with Blizzard Entertainment's StarCraft. When the original bits of what would become Halo were being produced, Bungie had a different idea. As they were working on the vehicle combat, the developers realized it would be more fun to have the player drive the vehicles themselves instead of commanding them around the level from a top-down perspective. Thus came a shift away from RTS into a third-person game before ultimately ending up in the first-person format we know today. But while the concept of Halo as an RTS ended early into production for Bungie, Microsoft on the other hand was still keen on the idea. And in 2006, Tony Goodman, the CEO of the Microsoft-owned Ensemble Studios, would go on to announce, quote, "We're giving RTS games on the console a shot, without much further elaboration." No title, trailer, or even general theme of the game was revealed up to that point, only that Ensemble was looking into making RTS for consoles, notably trying to find a control scheme that would translate well to the platform. While console ports of RTSs were far from unheard of, they often struggled to live up to their PC counterparts due to the difficulties associated with effectively translating mouse and keyboard controls to a console's controller. Complex base-building mechanics, unit grouping and positioning, along with managing resources was something that despite Ensemble trying for over a year to develop an efficient control scheme, just didn't mesh well with console gaming. In the words of Microsoft Game Studios' then lead producer Jason Pace, "You can't effectively bring a PC-style strategy game to the console because the fundamental game mechanic is tied to the mouse and keyboard input devices. It's not a question of just changing the control scheme to be gamepad friendly, you need to adapt the underlying strategy mechanic to make sense with the new input device." Ensemble realized this, and aside from keeping the console-friendly control scheme they had developed earlier, went on to scrap virtually everything else they had designed, and began development on the foundations of a brand new game specifically made for consoles. Ensemble then presented what they had been working on to Microsoft, who liked what they saw and were, according to Goodman, risk-averse to the idea of creating a strategy game on a console without some sort of recognizable branding to go along with it, and thus the idea of Halo Wars was born. This, however, wasn't the original vision for what Ensemble had been working on, as what they had been developing was built off of one of their previous games, Age of Mythology, which was a completely different style and theme to that of Halo. This left some developers within the studio frustrated and caused Ensemble to lose about a year of development progress, as they had to entirely change everything about the game, with Microsoft simply telling them to, quote, "paint over what you have with some Halo stuff." But obviously, it wasn't that simple. The team over at Ensemble had to once again start from scratch and make every single Halo asset themselves. On top of all this, it had been reported that there was quite a bit of tension between Ensemble and Bungie, who was displeased that Microsoft was, as they put it, whoring out the franchise. But not everyone at Bungie was so hostile. Bungie's AI specialist Damien Isla went on the record in 2008 to say, quote, "We're all really excited about Halo Wars, because everything we've seen so far, it's a really cool, very faithful adaptation." Despite Bungie's mixed feelings, Halo Wars was at this point very much in development, with the team over at Ensemble drawing much inspiration from prior games' concept art, and even getting some inspiration from the, at the time, in-production Halo movie, which sadly never saw the light of day. In late 2006, Halo Wars would be publicly revealed for the first time in the form of a brief pre-rendered trailer made by Blur Studios. I remember watching this as a kid and seeing Halo on such a massive scale that we had never seen before for the first time, and it was truly breathtaking. You have to remember, at this point, Halo 3 wasn't out yet, and Halo 2 was a bit scaled back compared to Halo 1 in terms of its campaign. So, just seeing the concept of these massive battles with loads of scorpions, warthogs, and banshees all battling each other at the same time was entirely unique for Halo. And then there was the reveal at the end.
This is Spartan Group Omega. If they want war, we'll give them war.
For those of you watching who are newer Halo fans, or maybe just don't quite remember, that reveal was absolutely insane. Prior to Halo Reach, multiple Spartans being seen on screen simultaneously just wasn't a thing. Spartans were quite literally the stuff of legends, so much so that in the FPS games, both human and alien NPCs alike would remark on their rare presence, and as players, we only ever saw them as the Master Chief, so having multiple Spartans at once was truly groundbreaking for its time. The pre-rendered cutscene itself was also pretty groundbreaking, especially for 2006, so all this together had a big role in hyping up the first Halo Wars. About a year later, there would be another reveal in the form of a gameplay demonstration where the lead designer at Ensemble, Graham Devine, would walk viewers through a linear test level. This version of Halo Wars was substantially different than the final game, sporting an alternate art style and UI, as well as a completely different set of structures for the UNSC. Further contrasting the final game, these structures possessed more detailed animations than their later counterparts, with mechanics repairing warthogs, soldiers doing push-ups outside the barracks, and some buildings that were entirely exclusive to this demo, like the landing pad and missile silo. It's also worth noting that the structures seem to be individually placed instead of being connected to a central base building like they are in the final game. Most notably, towards the end of the demo, there's a scarab, but it doesn't look anything like the scarab in the final game, and instead shares much more of its design with the scarab from Halo 2. Specifics on why Halo Wars changed so much from this early build are largely unknown to this day, though I would be curious to see what it would have looked like if it continued on this original direction. Halo Wars would go on to have several more demos, all looking much closer to the final product, only with minor differences like icons. The game would go on to release in a bit of an odd order, being released first in Australia on February 26th of 2009, then coming out on the 27th in the EU, with the North American release being among the last on March 3rd of the same year. This was odd considering that all the other Halo games up to this point came out in North America first. As far as I could find, there isn't a reason given for this, it's just, much like the changes from the 2007 E3 trailer, another peculiar thing about the original Halo Wars. The release was overall a success, with Wars selling over 1 million copies by mid-March, just a few weeks after release. While the game sold far less than Halo 3, it was still a big deal, especially considering that Halo was new to the RTS genre. A genre that by the late 2000s was long past its heyday to say the least, with Command & Conquer 3, a well-established RTS coming out just a year earlier, only selling about 130,000 units in its first couple of weeks. The reception of the game was, and is to this day, quite mixed, with some outlets giving it a 9 out of 10, while others rated it at a more moderate 6.5. Among actual Halo fans, results are more varied still. Some people will tell you this game is trash, and without the Halo branding would just be a forgotten, failed RTS from an era chock full of more of the same. Others will say that Halo Wars was a great idea in concept, but failed in execution, with things like leader rushing, a lackluster story, and an overly simplified game design being among the chief complaints. I, however, absolutely loved this game. Halo Wars 1 specifically goes down in history as one of my favorites of all time. I fell in love with it day one. Everything from the unique gameplay to the soundtrack to the cutscenes and character voice lines make this game everything I wanted as both a fan of Halo and RTSs. I personally own 3 copies of it, one on the regular 360, one collector's edition with the steelbook, and of course the definitive edition on PC. I actually had the end credits theme for this game play at my wedding, so to put it lightly, I'm sort of a super fan of the first Halo Wars. Halo Wars as a spin-off achieves something that I think very, very few spin-offs do, especially when they're made by someone other than the original people that worked on a series. I have been extremely critical of Halo's current caretakers, 343/Halo Studios, on this channel, mainly because it's abundantly clear to me that they have little to no interest in making an actual Halo game. They capitalize far too much on nostalgia, then somehow manage to screw up the most basic components of continuing a series. But I've done countless videos on that topic and will likely do more soon. But back to Halo Wars, and what the developers at Ensemble did with Halo just so well, was understanding and, more importantly, respecting its foundation. We can see this in the original 2007 E3 demo, where Graham Devine, the narrator and lead designer of Halo Wars, says the following.
Warthogs are perhaps the most iconic vehicle from the Halo games. Everyone knows what a Warthog sounds like, looks like, feels like, drives like. So getting that right in Halo Wars was really important. So we built a lot of physics into the engine. And it fishtails around, it moves, and it drives, just like a Warthog from the Halo games. And you'll see this in all the other vehicles we have too.
And this wasn't just a one-off either. Throughout several different interviews, Devine repeatedly drives home this idea that there has to be consistency in the universe and theme. In response to being asked about designing new things for the existing universe, he said the following. The humans need to fire lead. and the aliens need to fire plasma. You can't just suddenly give the humans ray guns. And this is something that translated so well into the first Halo Wars. The UNSC still feels very much like the UNSC. Just like in the original games, they have this sort of retro-future mix of 1980s alien aesthetics with a bit of modern stuff thrown in, but nothing crazy like neon colors or Power Ranger-like Spartans that are the end-all be-all superheroes of the story. Spartans in Halo Wars are still very much Spartans, but as noted in another interview, quote, "They're not the super soldier." That was one of the many things Ensemble got right. They didn't try to replace the Master Chief. They didn't try to do it better, nor were they rebuilding Halo in their own image. They stuck to the focus of what made Halo Halo, whilst also amicably converting our beloved FPS franchise into an RTS, and this is what, in my opinion, at least Halo Wars does so well. Everything about Halo Wars feels Halo, but that's something we're going to be returning to a bit later. Now, another thing I wanted to note about Halo Wars is just how well some of the campaign is designed. Sure, there are some infuriating levels, such as the one where you have to fight a very spongy super scarab, and another where you're tasked with defending 3 civilian cargo transports, which to this day seems borderline impossible. But among the flaws, there are some real gems, with rather unique designs such as this one, where the player is tasked with escorting an elephant with a slipspace drive in tow up a series of hills. If you lose the elephant on a hill, the drive rolls back to the bottom of the previous. It's a sort of innovative way to make an interesting level that avoids the go here, destroy this, build more base there monotony that we see so many RTS campaigns fall prey to. There are a lot of levels like this where some are your sort of typical build a base with limited resources and destroy the enemy, while others, such as this one, have you scavenging the map to free up trapped elephants that have been overtaken by the Flood. It turns the game into a combination of exploration and simultaneous tower defense without making things too complicated. Then there are my favorite levels. One that puts the player on top of the Spirit of Fire, the main ship in the game, usually responsible for providing support and units to the player, only now you are the one responsible for building it up and providing support. From a narrative standpoint, this level is fantastic as well. The Spirit of Fire is literally pulled into a sort of antechamber with the Shield world in order for it to be cleansed of a Flood infestation. And that's another thing. From my brief description of the campaign and the footage in this video, something you may have noticed is that Halo Wars, for the most part, includes almost every bit of Halo that there was at the time it was released. You've got Sentinels, Brutes, Beam Rifles, Carbines, Warthogs, Scorpions, Scarabs, ODSTs, Elephants, and some new stuff as well. Something wrong with the modern iterations of Halo is just how much Halo is missing. Many concepts like dual wielding and plasma rifles and in some cases, even entire factions are missing. Remember how I said earlier that the team over at Ensemble used the concept art from Bungies games and the movie as an inspiration? It shows. In the overwhelming majority of cases, everything that was in previous Halo games is in Halo Wars, from the weapons to the vehicles to the different aliens and factions, even down to simpler things like dual wielding. Halo Wars had everything and more, and it did so in a way that was respectful to the player. Things weren't just shoved in for the sake of it, it didn't feel overbloated, and nothing major was retconned. The Flood are discovered as a first within Halo Wars' story, but the ending has the Spirit of Fire adrift in space without its slipspace drive and no way to contact the UNSC, so therefore making the lore entirely self-contained. Ensemble knew what they were tasked to do. They knew that Halo wasn't theirs, but it was their job to make a Halo game, and I think they went about it in the best way possible. They even wrote some new characters, but didn't make them obnoxious. The Master Chief was intentionally kept out of the story, and these new characters were meant as supplements rather than in-your-face replacements. They were written not as carbon copies of other existing characters, but more as something that shared a similar DNA. Red Team still looks like Spartans, they're very recognizable and dare I say iconic, but they aren't quite the same. They are the literal before. Another interesting tidbit from the various interviews I collected for this video is what Graham Devine said specifically regarding the Spartans, quote, "We looked a lot at combat infantry going into actual wars, and typically, at the beginning of a war, especially the Vietnam War, if you look at the infantry, they're all loaded up. They have all the backpacks on, they have all the belts on, every single bit of armor is there, and they're carrying around lots of armor. At the end of the war, they've lost it all and just carry what they need." You can see a similar aesthetic choice in Bungie's Halo Reach as well, where Spartans do have these little pouches, ammo containers, GPS mounts, and the like, and all of this was by design. Halo was a military sci-fi, with a strong emphasis on the military part. It had some basis in reality, and the designers weren't afraid of a little bit of gritty, grounded realism. They didn't run from realistic depictions of military gear, and this was overwhelmingly for the better. But back to the characters. So you had Serena, who was the new AI. She was similar in a lot of ways to Cortana, if not a bit more sarcastic and quippy, but in a good way. Her quips added to her character without being too annoying. Then you have Cutter and Forge that, while a bit generic, still serves the story well. A thing 343 doesn't understand about Halo is that Halo is more about the universe. It's about the grander scale. It is literally a larger-than-life story. There are certainly moments for individual characters to shine, but that's all they are. Moments. There's a perceptible amount of tension between Anders and Serena. There's a different kind of tension between Anders and Forge that changes as the story goes on, and this just works. Not because of some deep characterization with feelings and long monologues like we saw in Halo 4 or Infinite, but because instead a lighter presentation that does just enough to establish who these characters are and allows them to serve as a sort of vessel for the player to dream up and observe the rest. Cutter is the responsible old captain who cares about his people more than anything else. Forge is the badass marine who thinks with his weapon first. While Anders is, well, a bit too curious for her own good, sometimes the push the rest of the characters need to get over the metaphorical hill. The four of them work well in tandem. Cutter provides the support, Anders provides the venture, and Forge the boots-on-the-ground rescue when things go awry, with Serena being there to occasionally point out the absurdity of it all.
Threading a needle while accelerating around an exploding star inside a planet that's falling apart? Well, sure. Why not?
Serena, can you do it?
It's done. You might want to hold on to something. Closing your eyes might help too.
I'm not saying the story of Halo Wars is perfect. There are times when it moves a bit too fast, but overall it's definitely a satisfying entry into the series, and perhaps more importantly, it translates into gameplay quite well. The campaign has us visiting three major locales: the post-glassing colony world of Harvest, the actively under invasion world of Arcadia, and finally the Forerunner Shield facility, a massive artificially created planet with multiple levels within, much like the original Halo ring. On top of this, add several unique sub-locations to the main ones, like the aforementioned deck of the Spirit of Fire, or the flood-infested portions of the Shield world, and that makes for quite the variety of battlefields for the player to enjoy, and this extends to the multiplayer. Halo Wars 1 has a total of 18 skirmish maps, including the Historical Battles DLC, which is bundled in with the Definitive Edition. A brief side note that I need to add here is that if you have these maps on Xbox, you can't play them without being connected to Xbox Live, even in single player. Gotta love DRM. But back to the topic, these maps are some of the most incredible I've seen in an RTS. A lot of real-time strategy maps feel generic. Simplistic environments with some hills here, some capture points there, or other resource collection areas. But Halo Wars did something really special. Much like the campaign, every skirmish or multiplayer map has its own features that make them unique. On each one, you'll find one of three neutral factions occupying most of the base deployment areas. You've got the Rebels, the Flood, and the Sentinels. This requires the player to not just scout the map, but also fight for ownership of certain areas, some of which are more valuable than others. It introduces a level of map control and strategic depth that is crucial in RTS games, and that's not to mention the unique tech buildings, as I'll call them, that provide various bonuses to whoever controls them. From bonus reactors that save you from having to make a costly investment building your own, to Forerunner supply elevators that can either give you a boost early on or help you stay in the fight mid-game, to others like the Uber turret or life support pods, the latter of which can increase the population of your army free of charge. Well, free of monetary charge, that is, as you might lose quite a few squads trying to take it from the neutrals or other players, and that's just a few examples. Each map is littered with these sort of bonus side objectives, and then you have interactive map elements like teleporters, light bridges that turn on and off at random, and all sorts of cover ranging from sniper towers to destroyed buses, pelicans, and warthogs. Keep this in mind because it's going to come up again a bit later. Then there's the map design itself. Each one in the first Halo Wars was carefully crafted to be unique. There's everything from Labyrinth, which, as the name would suggest, offers a bit of a maze of large Forerunner walls at its center, the exploration of which may yield some bonuses, or some confusion depending on how you go about it. Then there is, of course, Chasms, the very first skirmish map many got to experience back in the day, as it was featured in the original Halo Wars demo on the 360. The map consists of roughly 3 lanes with side passages offering clever flanking routes, access to additional bases, and supply elevators as well as some strategically placed crates players can get for an early bonus. Last but not least of the examples I'm going to discuss here, and we have what is perhaps the most underrated version of Blood Gulch. Yes, Blood Gulch made its way into Halo Wars. It is what you'd expect, essentially a supersized version of the Curious Scourge we all knew and loved from the first Halo, and a certain now defunct web series about a group of red and blue soldiers. Halo Wars, as I mentioned earlier, is one of my favorite games of all time, so when Halo Wars 2 was announced, I was literally jumping up and down in my chair. This trailer had me, and I think every other Halo fan, bouncing off the walls with excitement. To provide a little bit of context here, this trailer wasn't just a big deal because it was Halo Wars 2, it was a big deal because of what it represented. Halo 4, and even more so Halo 5, hadn't been received particularly well in terms of story and art direction. The very cartoonish, overly bright, non-gritty atmosphere offered by 343's first two titles was a stark contrast to what we had been used to, especially considering that Bungie had left us with Reach, which was by far their grittiest, most realistic-looking title. Suffice to say, many were eager to see some semblance of that classic, grounded art style return. The dark grays, the greens, the bright flashes of weapons going off contrasting the rest of the gloomy tone, and the Halo Wars 2 trailer was all that, but there was also something else. In 2012, when people got their hands on Halo 4, many were confused. The question on the tip of all of our tongues was, where are the brutes? People kept asking. They were a central plot point in Halos 2, 3, and ODST, and while not as important to the story in Reach or the original Halo Wars, they still held prominent role. Even in some of the 343 era books, they were mentioned as still very much being a thing. So, where were they in the 343 games? Up until this point, nobody really knew. They didn't make an appearance in Halo 4 or 5, and 343 was pretty tight-lipped about it. Seeing the brutes not only return in the reveal trailer, but also return as such a powerful and, no pun intended, brutish force that could take on 3 Spartans and win, was not only entertaining for viewers, but it seemed to signify a much-requested change in attitude and direction of the series. The UNSC was no longer full of Marvel-styled superheroes like they were in Halo 5. The story wasn't focused on the legend of Master Chief or some space magic forerunner nonsense like it was in 4. The Wars 2 trailer made it clear. We were returning to a grounded, hopeless conflict in which humanity would very much be on the back foot. After all, we just saw 3 Spartans whom in the previous game we saw do this get completely dunked on by a single brute that came out of nowhere. But that last part would be the story's undoing. Halo Wars 2 introduces the Banished, a faction of former Covenant aliens that apparently existed the whole time throughout the mainline games, and were just waging a secret civil war before the days of, well, anything else. They are never once mentioned in the original games, especially during the times it would make a lot of sense to. Nobody talks about them, nobody interacts with them, but they were there. Source? Just trust me, bro, 343 said it. The Banished, as a faction, are a cool concept. The idea that a brute said enough is enough and rebelled against the Covenant, forming a real genuine resistance group, is interesting to say the least. I just have a problem with the way that it was presented. In a lot of ways, and I know this will generate debate, but I view the Banished as not much better than the Prometheans in terms of lore. As much like the Prometheans, the Banished just kind of come out of nowhere. They exist for the sake of giving the player something new to shoot at, and they don't really fit into the rest of the lore. Their motives are weak at best. Why are they fighting humans? The whole reason the Covenant fought humanity was because the Prophet said their destruction was the will of the gods, and a major motive of the Banished very existence is that they don't hold with the Covenant's belief structure. We can see this stated repeatedly throughout the game. They doubt the Covenant so much to the point that some of them don't even believe in the existence of the Flood. The belief, mystique, and mirage of the Forerunners are gods is not shown to really be a thing for the Banished, at least not in-game. There are no references to the Great Journey. There is not really anything linking them to the Covenant except for the fact that they use some of the Covenant's former gear and are made up of their former species. Oh, and that's also another weird thing. There are no jackals in Halo Wars 2. At all. I have no idea why, but for some reason, the aliens that have been in every Halo game since Halo 1 just aren't in Halo Wars 2. It is the only Halo game that doesn't feature jackals. I have no idea why. But missing features aside, the Banished motives at worst don't exist. In-game, it's never made super clear as to why the Banished are even on the Ark, what precisely they're searching for, and what they plan to do with it. and they end up being boiled down to cackling comic book villains, which we're consistently reminded of throughout the campaign.
So you crawled out of your hiding places for another battering? I thought we bloodied you enough last time. That was a taste of our power, humans. If you want more, I'll be waiting.
Halo Wars 2's story regularly features moments like this, and I have to ask, if the Banished can just fire giant lasers anywhere on the battlefield at virtually any time, what's stopping them from just glassing the UNSC off the Ark? What is stopping them from engaging the Spirit of Fire directly? After all, we know from prior established lore that UNSC ships, especially old ones like the Spirit of Fire, don't do too well against Covenant technology. So why are the Banished holding back? In Halo Wars 1, there's a soft explanation for this. The Covenant are spread thinly between Arcadia, Harvest, and the Shield World. Not to mention, everything kinda happens on the fly, and impromptu, so as a result, we see that the Covenant ships present towards the end of the game are smaller ships than normal, and even they still directly try to engage the Spirit of Fire, which regularly has to rely more on escape and evasion rather than raw firepower. Throughout the rest of the game, they're supported by other UNSC infrastructure both on the ground and in the vacuum of space. But in Halo Wars 2, it's revealed that there is no more UNSC on the Ark. The Spirit of Fire just appears there for reasons that are never explained, and the crew wakes up from cryosleep before heading down to the surface to investigate. Another major gripe I have with this game right off the bat is how almost everyone has been recast. Serena is still her original voice actor, but that hardly matters, since she's only in the very beginning of the game as she's immediately killed off. Other than that, everybody else is not only voiced by somebody different, but modeled differently as well. Anders looks little like Anders from Halo Wars 1, and Cutter somehow got about 20 years younger. He went from looking like a tired, determined war veteran to a rough 40-something gas station employee. There were technical reasons to why this was done, ranging from scheduling conflicts with voice actors to motion capture advancements, but still, I think this could have been done better. These characters look and sound nothing like the ones they're meant to be. When asked why this was the case specifically with Cutter, Grim Brother 1 from 343, the same Grim Brother 1 who told people they were entitled for expecting MCC to work on launch, simply responded, "Cryo and coconut oil, baby." I guess he was trying to one-up Frank's nanobots explanations for the Chief's armor changing in Halo 4.
It doesn't always make an awful lot of sort of predictive scientific sense, but weirdly enough, things happen in science all the time that actually leapfrog some of the anachronisms in our universe. I know that some fans were upset of the idea of nanobots making repairs to the Chief's armor.
The UNSC is it's funny because we haven't actually very deeply defined what it is. We know what it is internally, but we haven't talked a lot about its structure and its makeup. It's a military government.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
On a serious note, like many things within the 343 era lore, there is no explanation for this whatsoever. In fact, much of Halo Wars 2's storyline happens with no mention of the events from the previous game. Wars 2 begins with the remaining crew of the Spirit of Fire waking from cryosleep approximately 30 years after the end of the original Halo Wars. Nobody seems to care about the discovery of the Flood, the loss of countless Marines, the Shield World they just blew up, or anything else for that matter. Stranger still is that Anders and Cutter don't even seem to notice that Sergeant Forge is gone, which always seemed weird to me, considering it's more than implied that Forge and Anders kind of had a thing for each other. There is the obvious instance of Anders saving Forge's life early on in the game, as well as Forge becoming quite upset with the idea of destroying the Covenant ship Anders is being held on.
Why aren't you in the med bay, Sergeant?
The Professor's signal has gone to light speed, headed for the border.
That puts it outside weapon range.
What? We have to go after her.
Sir, I can only track that transponder a few more seconds.
Captain!
Sir, Anders represents a significant security breach.
Serena, get us underway immediately. Follow that signal.
Aye, aye, sir.
If it sounds like I'm reaching, note the following Halo Wars timeline entry. Quote, Sergeant Forge confronts Spartan Douglas 042 over his recommendation to destroy the Covenant ship carrying Professor Anders. The altercation results in a broken chair, a seal malfunction on a bulkhead door, and a stern interruption by the ship's AI Serena. 042 and Forge always eat together in the mess hall following this event. So Forge literally fought a Spartan because the Spartan came up with the idea of killing Anders. Now, it should be noted this timeline entry actually contains an error, as it wasn't actually Douglas who suggested taking out Anders, it was Jerome, but other than that, it's clear that more happens outside of the cutscenes than what we're shown in-game. Also notable is how Forge rescues Anders from the Flood, and Anders tells Forge that she'll be watching him specifically from the ship during his mission to deliver the slipspace core. There is more than a small amount of suggestion here that Forge and Anders care about each other beyond simply being stationed on the same ship. If you still don't believe me, in an AMA from about 11 years ago, Graham Devine, again the lead designer and writer of Halo Wars, shares a bit with us about the early script for what could have been Halo Wars 2's plot. In it, Forge actually survives, having been transported by the Forerunner installation somewhere else right before it blew up. Anders, unwilling to let recent events go unanswered, purposely sets her cryopod to wake her 30 seconds after Cutter's activated, so she can continue researching and pursue a faint signal she picked up that she believed may have been Sergeant Forge. She finds him in 3 years go by, with a few on the ship being awake while Cutter sleeps. When he is awoken and brought up to speed, Serena even speaks to Anders, referring to Forge as, quote, lover boy. Even though this continuation of the story is non-canon, I think it's safe to say it's abundantly clear where the writer was going with this story. So Anders not seeming to care about Forge's death at all in Halo Wars 2 seems extremely out of character for her. And honestly, I like this beginning of the sequel better than the one we actually got. I'll link it in the description along with all these interviews if you want to read the whole thing. It's quite interesting. But back to the actual Halo Wars 2, in the Spirit of Fire sends some forces down onto the surface of the Ark to investigate. This is where we see the original reveal trailer play out, though this time with a bit more context. Red Team finds a deserted UNSC outpost, with the only survivor being an AI named Isabel, who, for some reason, instead of directly informing the Spartans of what's going on, decides to play the pronoun game instead.
Oh no. What was that?
It's him.
You're coming with us.
Red Team is forced to retreat, and the scene continues before they escape back to the Spirit of Fire, with one Spartan MIA and one wounded. Isabel then decides to be the angstiest character in the Halo universe up to this point, in a scene that is both equal parts cringy and annoying.
Isabel, this is Captain Cutter.
I know who you are. James Cutter. Captain of the Spirit of Fire. You're supposed to be lost with all hands.
Not so lost, it seems. What happened down there? I need to know what we're up against. Isabel? Isabel, report.
Isabel, as a character, is extremely cringy, even down to her appearance. She has this obnoxiously loud orange coloring and a girl boss haircut with a consistently whiny tone and facial expressions to boot. And she only exists purely to provide exposition dumps. There is nothing charming about her, nothing witty or funny like Serena or Cortana, and she's just there for the sake of it. After a cutscene explaining the origin of the Banished, we get into the actual campaign itself, which is pretty forgettable. The level design basically boils down to a mix of point control and glorified tower defense. By the end of the story, virtually nothing is resolved. The Spirit of Fire still doesn't link back up with the rest of the UNSC, the Banished aren't defeated or even substantially weakened as we can see in the final cutscenes, and the only thing that really happens is a replacement Halo ring is launched into space to replace the one that the Master Chief destroyed in the first game. Because we haven't seen that plotline before.
The replacement. The ring you destroyed.
Oh. The only thing of any real interest or consequence is the post-credit scene, where we see Anders, who boarded the ring before it departed the Ark, walking through a forest. In front of her is a Forerunner Guardian, because remember, this game takes place shortly after Halo 5. So Rampant Cortana now has control of a Halo ring. Maybe. I don't know, and neither does 343, because like almost every other plotline that 343 establishes, this one is completely dropped in the next game, and nearly 10 years after release, we still don't have an answer to what happened here, nor is there any news of a Halo Wars 3. Halo Wars 2, however, did have 2 story DLCs in the form of Operation Spearbreaker, which is a short 2-mission campaign that centers around some ODSTs, and Awakening the Nightmare, which is a bit more elaborate. Taking a look at Operation Spearbreaker first though, and this honestly should have been released as part of a free update. It's incredibly short, and much like the main game, nothing of consequence happens. The Banished attempt to get control of a Forerunner ship, and the UNSC stops them. The end. There are some cool set pieces, but overall it's nothing particularly memorable. Then there was the Awakening a Nightmare, the DLC. This one was hyped up beyond belief because, as you can see in the footage, the Flood makes a return. They could have done that in the vanilla game, especially considering the way they were brought back would have made perfect sense, but what can I say other than modern Halo is a complete cash cow, and this DLC wouldn't have sold as well or received the hype it did without the Flood's inclusion. Much like the Brutes, the Flood hadn't been seen in many years, with their last proper appearance in the series being in the first Halo Wars. Awakening the Nightmare was disappointing like the rest of the game. It included 2 new playable Banished factions, which were more or less the same as the regular Banished factions with a few new units and abilities. The story consists of a particularly arrogant brute named Voridus breaking into High Charity's wreckage to scavenge supplies despite his orders not to. Now this scene in and of itself has been controversial, as many believe that High Charity was destroyed completely in Halo 3, though I've never personally had a problem with it, as logically High Charity was absolutely massive. It was a floating city with millions if not billions aboard. It's more than fair to assume that some Flood could have survived. If you have an argument to the contrary, I'm open to hearing it, so let me know in the comments below. So Voridus enters High Charity's wreckage against the advice and orders from both his brother Pavium and Atriox, the Banished leader. Of course, when he does, the Flood emerges, infects some of his men, and chaos ensues. This is actually a pretty cool scene until you realize that for some reason, a lot of the Flood are now bright orange, looking like some off-brand Halloween prop rather than the Flood we knew and feared from the original games. In fact, the Flood in general are aesthetically inconsistent. Some of them look great, and exactly as you'd expect them to, while others look more like washed-up sea creatures that swallowed an orange glow stick. Flood biomass that permeates through some of the levels looks more like a giant Cinnabon than a powerful ancient interstellar zombie virus. Halo Wars 1 did the Flood far better, taking inspiration from the earlier mentioned concept arts, while the designers on Halo Wars 2 seem to have thrown those to the wind in favor of a more dumbed-down cartoonish look, and this is where I have to mention the art style as a whole. There's this narrative I've seen throughout the Halo community that seems to be the product of a few large YouTubers repeating the same line over and over again, and that is that Halo Wars is somehow a return to the classic art style. While there's certainly the return of some classic designs, Halo Wars 2 outside of the cutscenes looks nothing like any of the previous Halo games, and in fact shares more of its designs with Halos 4 and 5 than anything else. Look how exaggerated a lot of the geometry is with dark lines and overly accented shapes. Compare this to a similar environment from Halo Wars 1, and you'll notice things are generally much less saturated with far more believable angles. Even some of the in-game models like the Marines, for example, use Halo 4 and 5 variants, despite cutscenes using the original Halo Wars design. The colors of units are off too. In multiplayer, everything is a variant of red versus blue. In single player, the UNSC use a vibrant pine green color instead of the olive drab they used to use. Also, what happened to the original UNSC bases? I understand many may have been destroyed or left behind during the events of the first game, but these new bases look nothing like what the Spirit of Fire once had. They don't even look like something you'd see in Halo. They remind me, especially with the oversaturated plasticky looking textures, of a child's toy more than a military installation. Another question is, where did the Spirit of Fire get these? Where did they get any of the new vehicles or the new Marine uniforms? There's a lot here that just appears, and considering the Spirit and crew were adrift with no contact with the UNSC for 30 years, none of the new gear makes any sense. This could have been solved by showing a simple cutscene or having a level where the Spirit of Fire raids a destroyed UNSC base for supplies, similar to the way they do in the first game, but of course this wasn't written into the story. Why would it be? Nanomachines or something, right? But continuity and lore aside, this whole game's art style is off. It's a weird hybrid of the 343 era space fantasy and old designs mixed together to look like plastic toys. Pardon the pun, but this isn't it, Chief. The Banished are another story entirely. Their buildings look more like something the Jawas from Star Wars would build on Raxus Prime than anything the Brutes would have. It's mentioned through the campaign that the Banished are scavengers and guerrilla fighters. It doesn't make sense for them to spend all their time making entirely new buildings like this. In all reality, their vehicles are more the way to go. You can see it quite well in the Banshees, Ghosts, and Wraiths. These look like something that has been scavenged and up-armored, while their bases just look out of place, almost flanderized. Like the designers over at 343 and Creative Assembly said, but how can we put more spikes on it? I think this is an important point because throughout the Halo games we've seen the brute weapons. We've seen how they do have certain features that set them apart from the standard Covenant tech, but none of them looked this extreme. They still retained some level of their original source. The brute shot, for example, while obviously different from something like the concussion rifle, still looks alien and futuristic. The Banished bases look something like a metalhead and a caveman came up with together after consuming too much monster energy in their dad's garage, and I feel like it kind of misses the point. The Banished were, according to their initial reveal, meant to be more calculated and logical than the original brutes. They were meant to encourage strategy combined with brute force, but their design just suggests more of the latter. I want to be clear, I don't hate the Banished. I like the concept of them, and I love their vehicles. The vehicles look like they belong to the Banished, but you can still see the Covenant underneath for the most part. The Banished Scarab is amazing, and the others still look and feel great. It's just their bases that really threw me off, and the fact that throughout the game these supposedly calculated warlords constantly talk to the player like a Saturday morning cartoon villain.
Take your troops, take your ship, leave now, and I will not hunt you down.
Did you make the same offer to the people you slaughtered at that outpost? We're not going anywhere. We're only talking right now because you know I'm going to take this Ark from you.
Look, treachery. These are the only reasons you still live, Cutter.
The Covenant, throughout the rest of the games, bar maybe some sections of Halo 3, act like an organized military, if not a bit overzealous. They don't waste time or strategic prowess gloating and taunting the player while simultaneously telling them all their big evil plans. But the Banished in Halo Wars 2 do. This is strange because even within Halo 2, Tartarus, who was intentionally characterized as a bombastic and arrogant brute, didn't do this to such an extent, and unfortunately the Awakening the Nightmare DLC doesn't correct this, it embraces it further. Voridus continues to mess up things to the dismay of his brother Pavium, while still remaining never-endingly cocky, and Atriox scolds them both at the end. The Flood is contained, and much like the basis game's storytelling, nothing of consequence happens in the overarching lore. You could have never played this DLC, and you wouldn't be missing anything story-wise, which is a real shame. But now that I'm finished tearing apart the campaign, I wanted to talk about the multiplayer. After all, that's where most RTS games shine and where most playtime is spent. Halo Wars 2 gameplay-wise follows in the footsteps of Halo Wars 1, with a few notable changes, the biggest being there are now 2 resources to manage instead of 1. Traditional tech levels have been done away with in favor of an energy system that allows you to upgrade units as well as your base level. Energy is produced by either constructing generators or capturing power nodes around the map. Every map has them, and unlike its predecessor, Halo Wars 2 only has power nodes as capturable neutral structures. The Flood, Forerunner, and Rebel neutral bases are all gone, as are their assorted units. The supply elevators, life support pods, bonus reactors, and the rest no longer exist. Even cover for infantry is far less varied and immersive. Gone are the crashed Warthogs and Pelicans. They are now replaced with generic gray Forerunner guard towers, or the occasional circle of more generic gray scrap metal. Perhaps this is more about the art style change, but I find that it's a map issue as well, in that the Forerunner structures are much like they are in Halos 4 and 5, absolutely massive in Halo Wars 2. They take up most of the map in some cases. In Halo Wars 1, the Forerunner aesthetic follows that of the original games much better, with the gray metallic structures being largely dulled and overtaken by nature. Throughout all of Halo Wars 1's maps, we can see snow, foliage, and sand covering up bits of Forerunner architecture. The world really felt like it had been abandoned for 100,000 years, but Halo Wars 2's depictions of Forerunner architecture makes it look brand new. While there could be lore reasons for this doesn't look like Halo. This looks like Cybertron, and the never-ending plains of gray metal encompasses far too many of the maps, especially on the multiplayer side of things, of which Halo Wars 2, despite costing well over $100 with the DLC, only has 11 of. Compare that to Halo Wars 1, where we got 18 maps, most of which were substantially different from one another. Halo Wars 2's maps feel restrictive as well. If you set the player count to 2v2 or 1v1, large sections of the map will just be cut off if it's meant to support 3v3. It's not like the original Halo Wars where you could put 2 players on a large 6-player map and let them explore as they pleased. While Halo Wars 2 does have a significantly increased amount of leaders with their own units and abilities, if you bought the DLC that is, they don't make up for the lack of content in the maps themselves. Combine the overabundance of gray with the lack of neutral structures and tech buildings, and Halo Wars 2's maps feel boring. The multiplayer can be fun for the first game or 3, but there's a reason why I still play the original regularly and only picked up the second one for the first time in over a year specifically for this video. Halo Wars 2 also loses a lot of the depth the original had. Too often I find matches devolving into who can spam more of one unit type in one area, where in Halo Wars 1 it often felt like an actual war, with multiple battles and skirmishes involving mixed groups of different units happening all around the map simultaneously. There was also more of a difference in Wars 1 between the human and alien factions. The different ways each faction gained tech levels and used leader powers added an additional level of depth to the game. Covenant leaders needed to prioritize capturing bonus reactors if they were available, since their upgrades were more powerful but also significantly more expensive. The UNSC generally needed to gain more bases to place more reactors, or spend the costly amount of resources to upgrade existing ones. Wars 2 also introduces unit levels, which work sort of like speccing into a skill in an RPG. Infantry, vehicles, bases, and aircraft need to be upgraded, with each upgrade providing an incremental increase in damage and armor. The only problem is, unlike in Halo Wars 1, where there were visual differences with upgrades that were generally for individual units, Halo Wars 2 has no visual cues, so at the end of the day, you have no idea if an enemy's units are level 1, 2, or 3. Note that I'm not talking about their veterancy level, that's a separate stat altogether. Unit level is something that had to be specifically spec'd into, which only further encouraged spamming single units, or at least single types of units. The best way I could put it is that Halo Wars 1 felt like the giant Halo battle we always fantasized about, while Halo Wars 2 felt very video gamey and limited. At the end of the day, Wars 2 ends up feeling incredibly watered down, and even hand-holdy at times. Perhaps I should have mentioned this in the campaign section, but during the campaign you often get the same arbitrary limitations on the map you do in smaller multiplayer matches, where certain sections of the level are just closed off to you until the game is ready to let you go there, even if logically it would make sense for you to be able to. There's far less a sense of exploration like there was in the original, and that combined with the lack of maps, tech buildings, neutral factions, and general interactivity really makes me shy away from Halo Wars 2's multiplayer. I've heard a lot of people defend it, saying that all the new leaders are awesome, and they are pretty cool, but mods for Halo Wars 1 do that and more, so in my mind there's really no reason to play Halo Wars 2. But it somehow gets even worse. Terminus Firefight was a mode released alongside the Awakening the Nightmare DLC. It's a wave-based survival mode that pits the player up against all kinds of enemies. I don't have any complaints about the mode itself, in fact it's actually pretty cool. But it only has one map. Why would you make a game mode with only one map and then release it as DLC? And I'm not done yet here, because Halo Wars 2 did something even more egregious with its Blitz mode. A lot of people don't remember this one because fortunately it flopped pretty much on release, and I think it deserved to. Basically what it was a blatant pay-to-win mode that, like the Firefight, for some reason only had one map as well. Players would have to grind to unlock Blitz packs, which would give cards that would provide units or abilities to be used during the match. The goal was to control certain capture points and continuously spit out units. There was no base building, there was no real strategizing, just a single small map where you constantly spit out units. Where have I seen this before? Oh, right. In the game that shall not be named, otherwise known as Command & Conquer 4. Yes, the game that killed an entire franchise, 343 really looked at and said, yes, let's do that, but monetize it. So the Blitz packs didn't just provide units, they provided exclusive units, some of which you could only get in the Blitz mode. Seems like a missed opportunity for the rest of the game, but whatever, that's not even the most egregious part. The more duplicate cards you earned, which were of course given in the packs at random, the more powerful your units would be. So Halo Wars 2 literally had a grind/pay-to-win mode where you could buy more powerful units, and they were so lazy they only made a single map for it. Oh, I should also note that to this day, they're still selling Blitz packs. You can literally buy Blitz packs for $100, even though the mode only has one map and has been dead for like a decade. But yeah, that's a thing. So, $100+, Halo Wars 2 gives you a mediocre campaign, only 11 skirmish maps, 1 firefight map, and a pay-to-win microtransaction mode. This is why I will always say that Halo Wars 2 is vastly inferior to the original. But I think one of the saddest things is, it didn't have to be this way. A look at some of the concept art for the game realized that Wars 2 was originally, at least in the very early stages, meant to follow up more on the aesthetic of the classic games. It's even evident that the Prometheans were supposed to play a significant role as well. I can't help but wonder if maybe Wars 2 was originally meant to have more factions and a totally different story. It would make a lot of sense considering that the story we got felt both rushed in its writing and presentation, but I guess we'll never know. Many blame the fans for 343 dropping previous plot lines due to negative feedback and reception. But I want to say first and foremost, it's not the fans' fault for giving feedback that 343 can't seem to write a consistent story. And while many, including myself, didn't like the Prometheans, most people didn't want to see them gone altogether, just presented a bit more logically and balanced more for the gameplay. We aren't all sitting here angrily typing away on our keyboard saying 343 bad just for the sake of it. There are very real and legitimate criticisms of the way 343 has handled the lore and depiction of this series, just the same as there were some for the Bungies games, just not nearly as many. You don't have to agree with them, but saying it's the fans' fault for expressing displeasure with the way something was written or handled is a low self-esteem take at best. Allowing companies or individuals to bully you and accepting whatever poorly written plot hole-filled slop they give you because criticism apparently equals bad is not the way to live your life both in and out of gaming, and some within this Halo community need to learn that. On the same note, I'm not saying Halo Wars 2 is objectively a bad game. I don't think that it is. Far fewer games are genuinely bad than people claim. Halo Wars 2 isn't the worst game in the world. It isn't even the worst of the 343 games. In fact, I would consider it to be one of the better of the 343 era games, if not the best. It just falls flat of what the original set out to do in so many ways, and whatever innovations or new tricks it offers are ultimately not worth the trade-off when you consider what we lost from the original game. I think in the end, Halo Wars 2 was more a collection of good ideas mired by something. What that something is exactly, again, we'll never know. Greed was certainly a factor, as it's painfully evident with the Blitz mode. I have to mention again the fact that 343 is still selling Blitz packs for $100 to this day. $100 for randomized virtual items in a game mode that is completely dead and only contains one map. This is despite the fact that the game released almost 10 years ago now, and the rest of the game still suffers from glitches and bugs to this day. In fact, Halo Wars 2 never had particularly good post-launch support, with widespread server issues among other problems much like the MCC. So while I personally didn't play much of it compared to others, for the people that did and wanted to enjoy this game, I can't help but feel sympathy for them. But by far the biggest issue with Wars 2 is a lack of innovation, a failure to build on what was already there. They stripped so many features from the first game or just unnecessarily changed things and then added in their own that didn't work as well. Wars 2 could have been great. Playable, full-length UNSC and Banished campaigns with perhaps a Forerunner campaign as DLC would have been nice to see. Now that may sound far-fetched, especially if you weren't a fan of the RTS games of yesteryear, but in reality back then that was considered standard. While it is true that the original Halo Wars only had one campaign, that was not only Ensemble's first entry into console RTSs, but it was also the last game they would ever produce, as the studio was in the process of shutting down while they were finishing up Halo Wars 1, so I can't judge them that harshly. As of the making of this video, it doesn't look like there's any chance of a Halo Wars 3 on the horizon, as it's been almost 10 years since the second one came out, and there doesn't seem to be much interest from Microsoft nor the fanbase, and maybe that's for the best. In my mind, 343 Halo isn't canon anyways, and anything after Halo Reach deserves the CNC 4 treatment. What were we talking about again? Oh, right, a game that doesn't exist. On a serious note though, thank you for watching, especially if you made it this far. If you liked what you saw, consider subscribing. If you really liked what you saw, and you want to help me make more videos like this one, check out channel memberships. I have been your host, Broken Circle, and as always, thank you again, have a great day, stay safe, and remember, nothing ventured, nothing gained.